I love that we're going to overthink overthinking, right? So I think that's perfect.
This is Interfering Neurotic with me, Dr. Ash King, and mindfulness coach Darren Larson, where we navigate a life lived with the curses and blessings of big feelings. We finish off our two-parter on overthinking and take a deep dive into the emotions we're ignoring when we retreat into rumination. We explore whether complex emotions are the culprits luring us into overthinking, why is a fraught question to ask ourselves when we're feeling vulnerable, how to get out of our heads and into our bodies with mindfulness-based inquiry, and the challenge smart people face in stepping away from the intellectual into something more poetic and slippery. You're listening to Interfering Neurotic, and we are still on the topic of overthinking. So in our last episode, Darren and myself were exploring why we are so drawn to ruminate and overthink things that inevitably make us feel worse in the long run. And we wanted to keep diving into this topic because it's something that a lot of people experience and that a lot of people have this really fraught relationship because they know that they're engaging in something that doesn't leave them feeling good and doesn't help them in the long run. And yet we go back for more. Hey, Darren.
Why? How's it going, Ash? I love that we're going to overthink overthinking, right? So I think that's perfect. It's on brand. And I think I sent you, I've heard this comedian a couple times opening for Mike Birbiglia. Gary from Connecticut, I believe is his, you can find him on Instagram. He has lots of jokes about being an overthinker. And he says, you don't need to tell me that I'm overthinking. He said, you think I haven't thought of that? You think those of us who overthink, it hasn't occurred to us that we're overthinking? And I relate to that so much. So I don't know. Have you been doing any overthinking lately?
Are we just always overthinking? I think those of us who may be prone to sort of anxiety conditions might just find that it's such an inbuilt part of their day and how they operate. For the rest of us, for the rest of us, I'm someone with an anxiety condition, so I don't know where I'm placing myself on this spectrum. But obviously, context matters and what's happening in our lives matter. And overthinking, I suppose, is just a way that we feel like we're trying to get some level of control or understanding over what it is we're thinking about. So for me, the main culprit of overthinking has been pretty much my relationship and everything that's happened
Mm,
in the wake of,
mm,
of that falling apart. And you definitely get the feeling, and I know that you mentioned this in the last episode, of if I just if I
mm,
just keep thinking deeper and in maybe in different ways, I might land on that one thing. I might land on the golden nugget, which makes
mm.
everything make sense and allows it all to fall into place. That has never happened for me anyway. What about you, Darren?
Never, never. But I have devoted many hours to trying for sure. But it also, as I'm hearing you lay that out, we haven't really, and I don't think we have to be super academic about this. How are we supposed to even tell the difference? In some ways, I was thinking, is overthinking when you keep thinking well beyond there being any solution, or it almost feels like if you do come up with a solution, then was it overthinking? It wasn't over.
Mm.
So it's a time limited thing. It's almost like maybe that's what makes it so difficult is how do I know when I'm supposed to set it down? Which
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever told Jesus explicitly, but I'm sort of like, I know a lot of meditation teachers will say, just let it go, whatever. Not me. I'm like, please don't ever tell me to just let something go because if I could do that, if I could follow that advice, then I would, and my life would be totally different. I have to have something more tangible, and like I have to redirect my attention to something else,
Right.
because I don't know what that. I don't even know how to operationalize let it go. But you know what I and we don't have to go into the details. In fact, I kind of like not going into the narrative details, but just playing with the emotional challenge. What I hear in your current chapter of your life is a grief story. So we wouldn't tell someone who's grieving to stop grieving. And I think this makes this challenge. What is problematic? Is there even something problematic in what I'm doing, or is this what any person with strong feelings would be experiencing in a phase in their life that had grief involved in it, right? So I'm a big fan of not making a problem out of something that is just a human experience. We have to be I think we have to be very careful in academic psychology, in clinical psychology, to be careful not to pathologize anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment, grief, hopelessness, overwhelm. There's a difference between a persistent clinical issue that is problematic versus how do I navigate this rough patch without, I think in my own experience, I don't want to amplify my misery. But then how do I know the difference between I'm feeling and thinking and rethinking and thinking about the past and playing different little sliding door scenarios? What if we had said this? What if I had done this? What if I had started this? So there can be a kind of torturous aspect to some thinking, but maybe the topic of overthinking is a little too vague or fuzzy. I don't know.
When
Yeah.
thinking becomes overthinking. There's no clear category. And from a psychologist's perspective, I guess we would bundle it up into the whole rumination thing, which is more of a sort of a circular or spiral type of thinking,
Mm,
where no no problems are being solved. So it's not, this is my issue, this is how it's affecting me, here are some solutions. It's generally lots of whys and
yeah.
hows. And when you are mindful of the overthinking experience, an emotional component that I think, again, it's hard to tease apart whether the emotions have encouraged you to start thinking about this because you're like, I'm feeling this. Why am I feeling this? I definitely do that. I'm having a feeling. Why is this feeling occurring? And then you go, oh, yeah, it's because your husband left you. And remember when that happened? And I remember when he said that, and then you said that, and you thought this was going to happen, and then your friend said these things, and then this happened afterwards. So then you think about it, and then by thinking about it, you're actually throwing kerosene on the fire, and those feelings in your body, again, they amplify. And so
Mhm,
then, you can go into the whole self-judgment and criticism. Oh, I shouldn't be thinking of this thing. Like you said, I should just let it go. Like, why can't I just
mm,
let it go? And then,
mhm.
you're being hard on yourself, which again leaves you feeling even more crappy.
Well, and I think on the other side of that, you're sandwiched between not only that, and then on the other side, there's like all this psychological aphorisms and insights and pithy sayings on social media. Like, um, broadcasting support to people you don't even know. You've got this. You're a good person. Just remember, and none of that has ever helped me either. I'm so glad you said this about the asking why as part of the potential problem. I think why is a really fraught question to ask ourselves when we're feeling vulnerable. I think it's seductive. I do think that's a really insightful thing to point out because it's for you to point out this question itself leads us down certain roads where we're trying to solve what can't be solved. I remember one of my first mindfulness meditation teachers saying something about waiting for a different past. Is your sense of well-being, are you waiting for the past to be different than it was? That's not exactly it, but it was enough that when he said it, I was 36 years old. And I thought, I don't think so. And then I'm like, on a silent retreat, you have a lot of time to sit around and overthink, by the way. Little known fact, a lot of overthinking happens in a meditation hall. I can guarantee you. And I realized I was 36 years old and I had not sat with this question, am I waiting for a different past? I could have written a PhD thesis on all the ways I was waiting for a different past, and it had never occurred to me that I was doing that. From I don't want to have been born in Kansas. It's not that I'm not happy with my life, but I don't want to be gay. I don't want to be a feminine boy. I don't want to have been divorced. I don't want any of these things. I want to be able to go to a party and say something impressive about my life. And he pointed out that this tendency to keep waiting for a different past was a kind of delusion, as you said. So I think that's a really interesting thing. Maybe overthinking, part of a description is that it has a delusional component. We're focusing on things that are outside our control. If we're focusing on something within our control, I don't think we're overthinking, especially if it's something immediate. Like, is there some action I could take today? Some small action, probably smaller than I would want. Is there a small action that I could take today that would have an impact on how I'm feeling? Is a much better question to be asking ourselves,
Yes.
right?
That also gives it a behavioral component that it does feel like it shifts the practice of overthinking because overthinking is passive in a way. It does feel kind of active, like we were talking about in the last episode. It feels like we're doing something when we're overthinking, and the thoughts are racing here and there, but there's not a lot of clarity. It's kind of like the bad version of feeling like you've come up with this amazing screenplay or amazing
Yeah,
course idea or this amazing artwork that you want to create. And you can kind of see it in your mind, but it's not totally clear. And once you go to do it, you realize that it's a lot harder. Overthinking is like the similar version of that, but like an opposite version of that, where you're thinking you're getting all these things in place in your mind, and but you're not taking that next step to ever push it out into the world
right.
because perhaps whatever you think the next steps are going to be frightening and scary and difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
things are going to pan out in a different way than you wanted your life to go. So there is a
Mm-hmm.
sense of safety as well.
Whenever narrative, I'm looking for a narrative solution and I'm trying to write one when one is not foreseeable. I think that's a great condition or circumstance for me to be overthinking. It also reminded me, I just flew home a couple days ago and there was this bit where I started going towards the wrong gate and then I was cutting myself too short and there was a heightened emotionality while on the surface I'm trying to stay composed and move quickly. I'm trying to make sure I get to the right gate so I'm not don't have a scene. And I remember because this was very fresh, this had this vibe of the scene we've seen in a million movies where somebody's getting on a plane and it means they're going to be lonely forever or whatever if the person doesn't get to the airport in time and interrupt them and get on the plane. And I was waiting to get on the plane because then in the end I had plenty of time, but I thought, is it so wrong to we have this in our collective consciousness? There's something about getting on a plane being significant and wanting happy endings, wanting someone to race across town and intervene and say, please don't get on that plane, or I'm getting on that plane with you. Is it so bad to want that? Because I think, and maybe this is a neurotic bent. I want that. I want someone to run through an airport to stop me. I want that. But it's probably not a great thing to get locked into. I'm going to switch gears here by saying what is a better question besides what action I could take? Let's say that let's collect a couple questions actually. I love this approach. What are some better questions I could be asking when I think I might be overthinking? And this what action I could take, I think it's okay to ask ourselves, what is it I really want? What am I wanting here? And to not rush to have that answer and, sit with that question. When I talk about this in mindfulness workshops, I say when we're feeling unpleasant feelings, our first questions are why? Why is this happening? Why am I feeling this way? What can I do to stop this feeling, right? And who's to blame? Is there someone I can blame? Can I blame my parents, the world, my coworkers, whatever? The mindful questions, in my perspective, are always steering us into immediate perceptions. What would I call this feeling? Where am I feeling it? If that's a question that you can answer, that's a fun. If it's a question you can't answer ever, then I would skip that one. There are people who can't find it in their body, and that's not problematic. It just means you have a different composition. But if I can spot it, where am I feeling it? How strong is it? And sometimes it helps to just notice in the morning, oh my gosh, this is a 9. I can't do this day. But then it's like by 9 o'clock in the morning, it's a 3, and maybe it's a 7, and it's a 2, 2, 2, whatever. Noticing that has fluctuation throughout the day can be soothing somewhat, especially for things like grief, heartbreak. And then I guess that is the other thing. Is it fluctuating at all? Sometimes I can just sit there and notice, oh, I'm feeling sad. And the sadness can be palpable in my chest and sort of increase in intensity and shape, and then start to diminish, start to trail off, or it can sort of ease up instantly. So, I think these are the kind of questions that come to mind for me. If there's no solution, no narrative solution, no happy ending I can come up with, could I be willing to sometimes ask different questions? Ultimately, I think it's not a intellectual challenge. It's ultimately an emotional challenge. Instead of overthinking, get better at feeling. I think of it as intimacy, more intimately familiar with, in this case, my unpleasant emotions.
I think this is also a component of overthinking beyond the idea that we're thinking we're doing it to try to solve a problem or we're being a good person because we're worried about something that deserves to be worried about and that we're going to find some solution in this circular ruminative thinking, but trying not to go near the feelings. Like when we come into our heads, right? We are going
Uh-huh.
away from our bodies.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And
100%.
so that discomfort, just listening to you then sort of asking the questions about the body stuff and I do those things, but there's just something I don't know. So, when they invented toothpaste, a bit of a tangential line here, they wanted to get people to use it more regularly and people just didn't. They were not getting into it. And then they put the minty flavor in. And the minty flavor doesn't
Mm-hmm.
do anything to help us clean our teeth. Yet it feels a certain way in our mouths, and we feel then like we've accomplished something, that kind of fizzy,
Mm-hmm.
minty, tingly feeling. And I feel like the overthinking process, even though afterwards it makes me feel shit, when I'm doing it, I feel like it's got that minty
Huh.
flavor or even like a
Mm-hmm.
crunch to it. Whereas when I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing this observation of the body, of my feelings, where is it in the body? How intense am I feeling it? There's something that makes me feel like I can't quite get my teeth into that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Totally.
Does that
You
ring true?
know, totally, totally. Partly is because it starts out very nebulous, which is frustrating. So you feel like you're not doing it right. Like, wait, is this supposed to feel more specific than this? Like, I think it does start out very nebulous. And it's good that you said that because I have to remember I've been at this for a very long time. So I have a sort of repertoire around my emotions that I think is not normal because I've been working on it for a long time. However, I could say in encouragement, if you think of something that you've ever done, like a skill, like with music, something that starts out very nebulous and frustrating, like who wants to do piano scales? Nobody, right? But the
Hmm.
only way to get to Bach or Chopin is through scales. And so I would say we do have to get to some feeling of competence or fascination as quickly as we can in order to stay with this game. I would I would encourage something like, can I let it be as nebulous as it is without pressing that? And can I find any fluctuation or impermanence or dynamic quality in the sensation? I think if you can find something in the body that's moving, let's see if I can make this appealing. I don't know if I can. If part of this is it's paradoxical, but let's say if I were to put myself in your shoes and to be going through something like what you're going through right now with this end of a long-term relationship that you didn't ask for, it's too big. So one way I could make it interesting for myself is to break it down like a puzzle into component parts. Overwhelm is too big, grief is too big. for me, I have this sort of what would I call these culprits, or I have players that lead to overwhelm. Overwhelm is amorphous, nebulous. But if I notice, is there anger somewhere in my body that I can feel? Something that feels like anger? Is there sadness? Is there fear? Is there embarrassment? Is there hopelessness? One of those is likely the ringleader, and the others are sort of being amplified indirectly. And one of those sensations is probably moving as I notice it. And that sounds woo woo. It's not woo woo at all. It feels like if I can say, oh, wow, sadness really seems to be in charge here, driving the show. And then embarrassment is getting on board and making the sadness more and making the embarrassment more. But if I can just locate the sadness, even approximately, even if it's just vaguely around my chest, or if I can find something more specific, if I can detect any movement in that sadness at a physical level, it's strangely comforting to just let that sadness sort of undulate. As I'm saying this, that sounds weird, but it's a very tangible thing. And what you're describing, I think this can be kind of an antidote to that, like, "Ugh, what's the point of this? This is stupid." I think this is especially difficult for smart people, by the way, to set aside the narrative for something that's a little bit more poetic and a little more slippery until you get a taste of what that feels like, to let sadness just kind of pulsate in your chest, and how that, okay, wait, that's kind of cool. I'm going to say one more thing, since I'm stepping out there saying things that could be interpreted as weird. And I think this is my torture. There's so not weird. It's the opposite of weird, but it sounds weird because we don't have context for this usually. But one of the things that I can makes it really fascinating for me, like when my daughter was a teenager and just generating all kinds of emotion at certain points in her life, right? There's a almost like a geometry. So like at first, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. My whole body just feels like hopelessness or sadness. But I start to get better at noticing, oh, you know what? There's a weepiness in my eyes, there's embarrassment in my face, there's a fear in my chest. If I can pick one of those and I can start to ask, feel my way through, just I'm sitting there in relative stillness, can I find, does that sensation that's conveying emotion, does it have a left side and a right side and a front and a back and a top and a bottom? That'll keep you busy for a little chunk of time, number one. Number two, it's fascinating when you can sort of notice there's sadness the size of a volleyball right at my chest, and it's concave. It doesn't really, it's not a whole sphere. There's no back to it. And then if I notice there's no sadness in my back, there's no sadness along my ribs, it just starts right here. Huh. There's no sadness in my feet. Something about that feels like it's almost like becoming a meteorologist or something. It's like, oh, I don't need to solve everything about myself as a potential mate, romantic partner. I don't need to unpack everything about my childhood. This is kind of mind-blowing that my body is capable of generating emotion in these very discrete ways. And the more specific my observation becomes, the less personal it feels. So I don't know. I should stop because I don't know how weird that sounds. Yeah,
Don't you ever have experiences, emotional experiences, where you feel like they're actually happening outside of your body too? Sometimes,
totally.
yeah, that's what
Totally.
I've been noticing lately. It's almost like that my body extends, and in this space beyond my body, the feeling is still there, which seems, again, weird to comment on, but it's like I don't exist in that space, but maybe I do. A lot of the sort of broader awareness exercises, which challenge us to, sit
Hmm.
in spacious awareness. I have noticed that lately, and sometimes I'm not quite sure what to do with that.
Yeah, I think of it as I think the body is emotionally more sophisticated than our current level of science is able to convey. And unfortunately, I think that our contemplative traditions are so wedded to their specific language that can sound real sanctimonious and airy-fairy and weird. And even when someone says, just open your heart, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. But there's something about that. If you can notice. It's a perception. This is how I frame it. I try to use it language that's as plain as possible. And I know my body is not doing something that's extending 3 inches out from my chest, but it certainly feels like that. And if
Mhm.
I'm honest, there is some flimsy gossamer thing kind of waving out in front of my chest. I'm like, I don't need to take that seriously. I don't need to become someone who's fascinated by psychic phenomenon or something. I can just notice, for whatever reason that I've never heard before. I'm feeling things I didn't know a person could feel, and they don't seem to always line up 100% with my physical body that I could sketch or sculpt or whatever, right? When you have that awareness, would you say that you found is that experience fascinating, comforting, distressing, disorienting? How would you, when you notice you're feeling something that doesn't line up with what you've experienced before, been told, how does that play out for you?
It depends on how focused I am with the mindfulness exercise that I'm engaged in, because I do notice that if I'm trying to get away from it, I will then start thinking. And then I'll start thinking
Mm,
about whatever it is that I was thinking about. And that's how I can notice my propensity to overthink, is how often does my thoughts take over when I am trying to practice being with my body. And it's a habitual thing. If this is a process that we've gone to time and time again, it's difficult
totally.
to do something different. But like we were saying again last week, it's something that we have to train ourselves to do. And we have to recognize that we do have a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
It feels doable when, you carve out 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a little period for you to do. So your mindfulness exercise. But I would find that to be more of a challenge if, say, it was 1 in the morning and I woke up and my thoughts were racing. And
Totally.
then I was like, look, I'm going to think about this. And then I think about this and I can feel it in my body. And I'm thinking, I'm thinking, I'm thinking. What then is the best strategy to sort of intervene when, again, we might not have our faculties completely online?
What I go for there, and it seems related to me because I feel like it's in the same spirit of what you're saying. I have to be careful whenever I'm describing something like feel these feelings, whatever. I never mean you have to do it a lot or all day by any means. But like
Mm,
you said, like a 5 or 10 minute chunk of time. Sometimes I feel like my nervous system is relieved to know if I keep this, I'm gonna I'm not trying to get rid of you, but I can only spend 10 minutes with you a day or whatever time I have to do that.
mm,
But what I wanted to add to this, based on your last question, is there's a very parental instinct. If the infant is crying at 2 in the morning, what would I do? And I might be too tired for it, and I might be angry or resentful, or I might be calculating how soon I'm going to get Alzheimer's because of this. But something about that baby, you are passing something on in this moment to that baby. And it's a contract. I'm not saying I will love you when you stop crying. You're saying, "Oh, I got you. I got you. I I don't know what's causing your upset. I'm gonna hold you and keep you safe, and we're gonna ride this out together. Whatever that is, and you might do that for a friend who's grieving, right? Or even a stranger, if the circumstance were right, you would have that capacity to just help be there and witness and observe and not add some pressure to that person. You would not add the pressure. You need to figure this out. You would just say, as long as you need, I'm here for you. It'll be nice if you go back to sleep. If that happens, that'd be great. But if you don't go back to sleep, the degree to which I love you is not contingent upon how quickly you settle yourself down.
mm,
If we can find a way to give that to ourselves, and for me, to me, it's like parent caring for fussy infant, but in my body, it doesn't feel like characters. It's not like Inside Out so much. It's more like artist noticing texture or scientist noting sensory data, but with that spirit of parental. unconditional, composed parental support that is also then, I think, don't you think when you're holding a crying baby and not freaking out about it, you're passing on the ability to regulate. Somewhere deep in the wiring, regulation is being passed on.
Yes.
And I think we've learned all kinds of ways to micromanage our own. I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't, as adults. And I think part of what we're doing is untangling some of that and reminding ourselves, I'm a resilient, but vulnerable animal that even though I'm in an adult body, I've got a lot of raw stuff that I share with the infant, especially in those moments where the rug's pulled out from under me
Hmm.
and I'm not sure what the future even looks like. I'm back in a strange kind of a primitive mode there, especially like you said, wake up at 2 in the morning and I'm not fully online. Can I just hold the baby? And sometimes that might mean just, I hate to say this because this sounds like something a mindfulness teacher would say, but having a hand on the heart and just kind of, it's like, I got you. I got
Yeah.
you. We're in this together. You don't need to figure it out tonight.
I
Anyway,
Oh man, the hand on the heart. Again, I was a bit like, that's hokey. I don't like it. But you know what?
right?
I found myself doing it, maybe definitely in places that I feel like I'm not going to make a total fool of myself. But at the end of a yoga class, for instance, and just having it there and applying some gentle pressure. I know that Kristen Neff guides that in some of her
Does she?
guided meditation, sort of self-compassion work. But just something there that feels like a moment of soothing and recognizing, yeah, like I got the baby.
Yeah.
I got you just now, just in this. And even doing it while I'm talking to you, there is something about that specific physical connection with self that feels
Yeah.
like you're being held in a way that's
Uh-huh.
deeper than intellectual.
Deeper than intellectual is exactly it. I was gonna say we're so smart, some of us. We can get so smart and so good at solving problems and forget we're animals. Um, and that we need, isn't it kind of fascinating? I think there's a long sweep of human history. And I don't think some of this has made it documented well. But there's something that I have to believe that our ancestors, in addition to being, if one more person tells me about the saber-toothed tiger on the savannah, I'm going to scream because in addition to that, we held babies, right? And we held crying babies and we comforted each other when we were dying. There's a lot of human stuff beyond a saber-toothed tiger coming to get you, that
Beyond the
is
fight or
in
flight
us.
response.
Right? There's a lot beyond that is like this. I think we're sitting on a gold mine emotionally. And you and I have talked about this before, that having high levels of emotional, let's just call it, I don't like the word instability, but let's just say emotionality. And if you have that plus conscientiousness, whatever, you're trying to be a good person and you're intelligent, I don't know. There's a lot of pressure to pretend that we're just minds and not these bodies that don't really care. I think sometimes the body doesn't care what the mind has to say sometimes. And that's why that hand on the heart or even like a lullaby. I remember one time like some Edie Brickell song about trying to feel less alone. It's hard to do that on my own. So I need a hand to hold. Something like that. It's this beautiful little thing. I remember being so upset and just almost like as a lullaby singing that to myself when I could recall the lyrics. uh, but sometimes what did ancient people do? They held, they rocked, they sang, they danced, they hummed. They didn't have some kind of elaborate intellectual solution, and they made it through, right?
Yeah.
And we've got that inheritance in us that we don't know how to tap into. And if we can get past some of the cultural things and the language that gets in the way and the hokiness, there's so many hokey sounding things, but if we find our own way into them on our own terms and in private, that ability to put your hand on your heart and comfort yourself at night, you can learn then to do that in a grocery store or doctor's office without making a scene, without doing a yoga posture on the airplane. You can find a way to extend that to yourself as well. So I love that kind of stuff. So
You know what? I think we should end it there. That's some beautiful food for thought. And I love the idea of connecting almost to a cultural inheritance that we all carry within us by virtue of being human beings. And human beings have been on the planet existing a lot longer than the scientific method, or a lot longer than we've been solving complex, mathematical equations in certain types of
right,
ways of thinking. So I think that so much of humanity and civilization is championed and celebrated for all of these intellectual achievements. And we can get a bit silent on the glorious gift of feeling and soothing and
right.
comforting. And I think maybe when we come back to chat, let's talk more about other people. This was quite self-referential here when we're thinking about how we're experiencing our own thoughts and feelings, but also what about when other people come into the mix? What about when we need to explain ourselves or what's going on for us and how that might be tricky? Thanks for the wonderful chat, Darren.